Fala, gurizada, David na área, segunda parte, terceira parte do nosso cafezinho. Eu me obriguei a fazer outra parte porque eu não consegui pular o vídeo, cara. A entrevista tá muito fera com o Dave Schartz, é uma parada que chama minha atenção. Eu não consegui pular, cara, que é o projeto que eu tô focado. Se tu é novo no canal, cara, se inscreva, deixa esse like, isso me ajuda muito aqui no YouTube. O YouTube, infelizmente, gira em torno de inscrição e like. Tu fazendo isso, o YouTube entende que vocês estão curtindo o conteúdo e começa a divulgar para mais pessoas sobre esse assunto. Cara, vai ter aquele merchan básico no início. No link da descrição aqui do vídeo tu vai ver o grupo do Telegram. Eu não cobro nada para te entrar. A única coisa que tu tem que fazer é instalar o Telegram no teu celular ou computador, entrar e seguir umas regrinhas básicas lá, que é respeito entre os integrantes, é ter um bom convívio. Eu não quero mimimi lá, debate, eu quero pessoas para compartilhar notícia e adquirir conhecimento. Então, se tu quiser, seja bem-vindo. Vai ter também na descrição do vídeo aí um cursinho iniciante, se tu quiser comprar, no valor de R$12 para te aprender tudo que envolve esse mundo cripto num e-book bem fácil. E tem a vaquinha também, se tu quiser me ajudar, tamo junto. Tu vai poder me ajudar a adquirir um Apple canal, que cara, eu não aguento mais esse core. Fazer o que? O que tem, né? Também não vou desmerecer, não vou cuspir no prato que eu comi, né? Então nós vamos pro resto do vídeo sobre o Dave Schartz e essa live top, cara. E aconteceu lá em 9 de dezembro de 2020, parece que tudo que ele falou lá atrás está acontecendo agora, só para te ter noção. Vamos ver então o resto do vídeo, cara, saiu no BankXRP, e só 7 mil pessoas, cara, quase 8 mil pessoas assistiram. Cara, eu me sinto privilegiado lá com o pessoal do Telegram que tá estudando essa parada aqui. Então vamos ver o resto do vídeo. Eu vou ajeitar aqui, vamos ver a configuração, se tá ainda tudo certinho. Tá tudo certinho, tá mais rápido o vídeo, porque ser uma live, para não se tornar uma live tão longa. Se eu não faço isso aqui, dá o dobro de tempo. Se tu quiser diminuir a velocidade para ler a tradução, é só tu vir aqui e botar 0,75, que já fica ótimo para te ver as traduções. Então, bora pro vídeo. Cara, só deixa eu ver o áudio, que às vezes dá a voz do Darth Vader por causa do áudio. Deixa eu ver aqui. Ah, tá certinho. Bora pro vídeo. Play.
Is I think still a question and it's still really early days. Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, don't want to talk too much about it, but regulation and kind of what's going on currently, the environment. Obviously, there's more regulation, but maybe some people would say that there's more clarity, which kind of helps kind of with the choices that are being made. And now, obviously with the Biden administration coming in, and what's your general feeling about?
Cara, do Biden, ano passado, tá chegando. Vamos ver o que o Dave Schartz vai falar. Se vai se confirmar ou se vai acontecer.
I guess I pointed in the United States to regulation in the U.S. and elsewhere as it relates to XRP.
Well, the U.S. has very unclear rules. It's not so much bad regulation, like bad rules are one thing because you can advocate that they be changed and you can maybe come up with workarounds. But the problem is that the rules are sort of applied inconsistently and are vague and very difficult to understand. And the United States has an unfortunate tendency of regulators that don't give clear answers to questions, and then a year later go to a business and say, you should have realized, 3 years ago that what you were doing wasn't compliant with the regulations. When all that time you were completely open and transparent and asking the regulators, we read the regulations this way, are we right? The other annoying thing in the U.S. is you not only have between 8 and 12 federal regulators that are arguing over exactly where cryptocurrencies fall in their jurisdiction. Obviously, the SEC is, the 30-pound gorilla or whatever, but I mean, there's also the CFTC and the OCC and many other regulators. And also, many of the states have been setting up their own regulation. And so if you want to do business in all of the states, you have to look at the regulations in all of the states that have them. And I applaud the state efforts to reduce regulatory uncertainty by coming up with regulatory frameworks. The problem is if you have 50 regulators, one in each state, plus 8 federal regulators or more, all coming up with their own rules, that's going to drive innovation out of the United States. And the United States has historically been the leader in tech innovation, but with blockchain and digital assets, there's no regulatory framework. And so I think that's strangling innovation and pushing it out of the country. And an analogy that I...
Empurrando para fora do país. Cara, é o que eu digo, uma das estratégias deles, tu não quer Estados Unidos, beleza, a gente vai para outro lugar. Isso lá em 2020.
I would use is if you imagine in the early days of the internet, there were regulatory issues with the internet. Information moving across borders is we think happens every day. We don't think about the idea of a government trying to put some sort of a control on information moving across borders. Kind of ridiculous today. But before the internet, there were controls on moving things like information across borders, and encryption was not brought.
Bora, gurizada, vamos voltar pro vídeo aqui. Acabei de trocar uma ideia com minha esposa. Eu vou ali, vamos continuar no vídeo. Bora pro vídeo, play.
about use of the internet to spread things like child sexual abuse materials and radicalizing terrorists. I mean, there were legitimate regulatory concerns with the internet, just like there are legitimate regulatory concerns with cryptocurrencies. I'm not saying regulators should like back off. There are scams, and I mean, there's bad things that can happen to consumers, exit scams from companies, and there's all kinds of things that need to be regulated. I don't deny that. But can you imagine if regulators in the United States in the early days of the internet said, like, this is going to allow information to move without control. We won't be able to have border controls on information. People are radicalizing terrorists and they're violating copyright and stealing intellectual property. We're just not going to allow the internet in the United States. Like, if you look at companies like Microsoft and Apple and Google, and I mean, I could go on, Amazon, like, these are US powerhouse international companies that thrived in the United States because the United States embraced the internet. And there were regulatory frameworks that helped the growth of the internet. And I think there's a good parallel with cryptocurrency here, because if the United States pushes cryptocurrency like away, it's not going to just disappear. It's going to move to Singapore, and it's going to move to the European Union and Switzerland, and it's going to move to India. And what that's going to mean is that the future powerhouses of the new financial system won't be US companies. And I think that would be a huge loss for the United States. One of the things that Ripple did very early is that the tendency for a company that's doing something like we're doing would have been to sort of try to fly under the radar and sort of comply with the rules in their technical, technically, like, oh no, that rule doesn't apply to us because, we have this decentralized thing. And so we don't need to follow that rule. But there's two problems with that. One of them is first of all, the rules could be changed to make things worse for you, and they will be if you do things like that, like if you avoid the regulations. But if regulators have legitimate interests, like money laundering and terrorist financing and drug money and all kinds of other people hiding money overseas, tax evasion, like they have all kinds of legitimate concerns, and they'll do what they have to address those concerns. So you can't just say, oh, technically I'm complying with the rules, I'll just change the rules and put you out of business. You don't want that. And the other thing is that if the first time you encounter a regulator is when something terrible happens, like God forbid some terrorist uses XRP like to fund their operation or any other cryptocurrency like that, the last thing you want is your first encounter with regulators to be when something terrible happens, and they just want to they just want this thing to go away. Like, you want to establish ahead of time with the regulators so that they know who you are and what you're doing. And so when something like this happens, you're an ally, not the adversary. It's like, okay, like, what can we do to stop things like this from happening? So, I don't know what else to say. It's kind of a little bit frustrating because we're a U.S. company. Ripple's a U.S. company. Like, the XRP ledger is global, and so from an XRP standpoint, it's just that it's a drag on institutional adoption. That there's a lack of certainty. One of the nice things from Ripple's point of view is that using XRP for on-demand liquidity is pretty easy for regulators to understand, and there isn't a consumer protection issue, because if it's a remittance, the remittance might be U.S. dollars, Mexican pesos. The XRP is sort of deep in the machine. And regulators will generally trust institutions to sort of like not, to take the risk of sort of funds in flight. But the big problem is trying to bring consumer adoption. It's just very, very difficult in the United States particularly.
Cara, incrível que pareça, eles conseguiram a adoção dos consumidores dos Estados Unidos. É só a questão governamental que tá rolando. Tu tá vendo a visão? O que eu tento passar para vocês, cara? O que tá acontecendo? O que é esse projeto de verdade? Projeto de verdade é isso que ele está nos passando aqui. Isso foi falado 1 ano atrás, e tem gente que conhece isso há muito tempo atrás e investe, ajuda a parada. Por isso que vem aquela certa indignação quando tu desinforma ou fala a besteira, cara, entendeu? Tu não gostar do projeto é uma coisa, agora tu criticar uma parada séria dessa, dizer que é uma merda, dizer que o outro saiu porque não presta, é complicado, cara. Eles ficam até bravos, os americanos, se vê uma opinião dessa. Eu não tenho nada contra as pessoas que falaram isso aí, cara. Não tenho nada. Não é mimimi nem nada, mas eu tô tentando te passar o lado deles. Esse lado da história. Vai pro vídeo.
What about the advent of stablecoins? So, that's, I wouldn't say it's a new thing, but it certainly stablecoins aren't what they are today when you guys developed XRP, and some of the interoperability aspects that you worked on with XRP Ledger seem to be encompassed in stablecoins in some way. And do you see that as competition, or do you see that as just complementary, moving, all boats rising with a higher tide type of thing, or how do you view that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things I could say, but I'll start by pointing out that a stablecoin is pegged to something, like it's pegged to a currency. So if you're in the US, a euro stablecoin is a semi-stable.
Cara, será que é uma cutucadinha na Ethereum? Vamos ver.
Stablecoin, and if you're in Europe, a US stablecoin is a semi-stablecoin. So if the pitch of a stablecoin is that it's absolutely stable, it is for some group of people. And so what you could have is a world where you have a USD stablecoin, the Euro stablecoin, the yuan stablecoin, and a rupee stablecoin, and so on. And I think that's use that.
Ih, cara, Acho que caiu a internet.
Digital assets work in the way the conventional financial system works. If I send you money to buy Bitcoin, let's say, once you give me the Bitcoin, it's gone. But there's ways that I might be able to reverse that transfer or claim that my payment to you wasn't authorized by the account holder. There's sort of a mismatch. We call it we analogize it like an impedance mismatch for old people who understand, radio communications. They don't fit very well. And so stablecoins fit much better. And there's two reasons why I think they're complementary. So one of them is you can't force your customers to accept something that doesn't match what their use case and their needs. You just can't. You can't tell a customer let's say you love Bitcoin. So you tell your customers, you're going to use Bitcoin for everything. Well, you're not going to have any customers because Bitcoin doesn't do everything, right? You're not going to have customers. The better the customer experience, the more customers you're going to have. An analogy I might use is that it doesn't help Twitter to make other things on the internet worse, because the reason every single one of us probably has a smartphone within reach that we can use to post things to Twitter is because of Twitter's competitors. Twitter didn't put that phone in our hands, right? It's because in the old days, people they like Google, and even going back to GeoCities and MySpace, made the internet popular and drove cell phone adoption. And a great ecosystem will put the tools for people to use XRP and use other digital assets in people's hands. So there has to be a thriving ecosystem. There has to be something for everyone. So that, the reason that every one of us carries a smartphone around is because there's something in a smartphone for everyone. Whatever you are, whatever you want, there's something that you can do with that phone that's useful to you. And so that ecosystem has just exploded. The other thing is that if there's not going to be one world stablecoin, the world is not going to adopt the dollar. If anything, it's sort of moving into a more fragmented direction. So I think there's an opportunity for digital assets like XRP to act as sort of the lubrication between stablecoins, as sort of the settlement. So if you imagine a U.S. settlement hub with businesses that pay their bills in U.S. dollars and get paid in U.S. dollars, and so they want sort of a dollar-denominated stablecoin. And then you might have a hub in China that's using some stablecoin that's pegged to the yuan. You need an asset that can sort of move between those two worlds that's kind of neutral. And so I think digital assets like XRP can position themselves as sort of those neutral assets. One pitch that I think could work is if there's not going to be one world currency, and the United States probably understands that they're not going to get the whole world to use the dollar, and I'm sure
Tem gente que fica na dúvida também se a XRP não ia valorizar. Cara, tá sempre falando, o XRP é o dispositivo neutro, é a principal parte da engrenagem na transação. Tudo passa por ele, cara. Então tira isso aí da cabeça que não tem como.
China understands they're not going to get the whole world to use their currency. It may make more sense to have a currency that nobody can control than to have a currency controlled by your geopolitical adversaries. And so it could be that everybody could settle on an asset that nobody can control. This is the same pitch Ripple makes to banks. So when we go to a bank, and you might think, well, why wouldn't a big bank want a system built by big banks and controlled by big banks that runs to make everything great for big banks? Well, there's a lot of banks that are not big banks. When I say big banks to most people, they think every bank's a big bank. There's really a small bank? Well, yeah. If you say to someone in the banking business, big bank, they think, JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank. It's not a long list, right? If I asked you to keep going with that list, you'd stop very, very soon. But there's thousands of banks. And so the ecosystem is not as banks are not all the same.
Yeah, agreed. And you're actually heading in a direction that I kind of wanted. We're coming up at the end of the session. I've got one more question after this, but you made a comment earlier about it might be ridiculous to if somebody had predicted what the internet would look like, some of the proclamations that would be made, etc. But you are recognized as one of the great minds in our industry, so it would be great just to hear you wax on a little bit about where things in your mind may go, let's say from a consumer standpoint, with cryptocurrency in 10.
Cara, presta atenção nisso. Cara, vamos dizer que ele está pensando por nós. Claro, ele vai falar uma parada que para te incentivar, que tu está investindo no projeto dele, mas vamos ver o que ele vai falar.
Years.
Essa pergunta.
What is a state of play vis-a-vis, how we pay for things today, in the future, from your perspective?
Well, I think we're going to see a kind of meet in the middle. So we're going to see continued institutional adoption, which is exciting. It's exciting when it's transformative for users, and that's kind of hard, because when you get adoption from a really big company, they don't generally push the benefits down to their users, and when you get adoption from a small company, it doesn't make major waves. So the direct to consumer is kind of the interesting space. And I think two trends that I think you're going to see are explosion of smaller and smaller, faster and faster, and cheaper payments. And I think that's going to be completely transformative to the way people think about payments. I would try to make predictions, but like I said, it's virtually impossible. One analogy I use, which again is terrible, is most people get paid roughly every 2 weeks. And the reason for that is because payments are expensive and have administrative overhead. You could imagine a world where as you're working, money is just being streamed at you, and you don't have to worry about, on what day of the month does this payment go out, or But it's hard to say how that will be transformative. But I think like ubiquitous interconnectivity of data has changed the world. You walk up to someone's house and ring the doorbell and they say, oh, David, you come by to drop off what, so-and-so, let me open the door for you. And like that all takes place over the internet, but you don't think of it. They may not be home and that's all automated, but you don't think of that as like the internet. It's just everything it just works nicely for you. Like the door just opens and you can just talk to the person. And so that sort of payments could become that same sort of thing where it's just available everywhere. It's hard to know how, like if I wanted to pay you, email is everything, payments aren't. Like if I want to pay you, if I want to send you an email, I ask your email address, and then I know I can send you an email and it just works. Like we have nothing like that in payments, right? I'd be like, do you have Venmo? Do you have Cash App? Do you have PayPal? Oh, I think I have PayPal, but I don't have any money in my PayPal. Like it's a mess, right? So I think that sort of ubiquitous payments that just work, I think is going to be transformative for consumers. The other thing that I think could happen in 10 years is more tokenization of things, which means better asset freedom. So I have pretty good access to hold whatever assets I want. Like I have a brokerage account and I have Forex accounts, and I can, if I want exposure to the euro, I can have it. And if I want to buy stocks, I can very easily do it. But a lot of people don't have those options. I get paid in US dollars. It's a pretty decent currency. I'm pretty happy to hold US dollars. But imagine if I didn't have those things. Imagine if I got paid in Mexican pesos, which not so great to hold. And imagine if I didn't have access to foreign currencies and I didn't have access to, equity, the equities market. That kind of sucks. What we could have is tokenization of just about everything. So someone, a Mexican farmer gets paid in Mexican pesos, but he's holding gold, just automatically. He's holding gold. And if he thinks about like his portfolio, small might be big, but he's like, you know what? There's this real estate investment trust in the Seychelles Islands that I really think is exciting. And he buys a very small share of that. And he holds it like in a sort of like this sort of tokenization of everything. And you need great payments for that to happen. Like that you can't, the security settlement of him buying like that piece of a real estate investment trust can't work if he can't pay for it, and it's not, and he's not going to hold it if he can't sell it, if he needs money to buy groceries. This idea of like having asset freedom and anybody at any level being able to hold whatever financial assets they want ideally in some kind of a decentralized system. So that's the other thing that this is the vision that first inspired me, I think. And I think in 10 years we can get there, which is right now, if I want to make payments somewhere, I'll typically use a payment provider who's pre-positioned money in the place where I need to make payments. So if I want to make payments to Malaysia, I'll find someone who's got money in Malaysia, some company whose business practice keeps money in Malaysia, so they can deliver the payment immediately when I want to make it. Or I'll have to put my own money in Malaysia, which is annoying, or it'll take days to get there, right? So that pre-positioning. But there's probably someone who has money in Malaysia just because that's where they keep their money. Like at zero cost, they have money in Malaysia because that's what they do. So this vision that I've had is this sort of open market for liquidity that anybody can contribute to and draw off of. So if I need to make a payment in Malaysia and there's someone who has money in Malaysia, I can find the person who's willing to offer me that money at the lowest possible price. And we can settle instantly and do that all trustlessly. So that sort of trustless financial system that enables anybody to hold any asset that they want, and ubiquitous payments and being able to hold an interest in any going concern anywhere, like that kind of open financial system. Is what I think.
Cara, tu tá vendo tudo isso que ele tá falando. Tu acha que uma parada dessa tem nada a ver? Não vai ser usado. Cara, agora que eu não saio no ônibus, eu vou ligar o ar até mais forte aqui. Pra mim ficar aqui sentadinho, se precisar dormir, eu durmo. O ônibus vai arrancar, isso aí é certo. Olha a complexidade do assunto e o cara tá falando pra vocês. O que é o Ripple XRP? Entendeu, cara? É essa visão que eu quero que vocês tenham. Não é conselho de compra, pelo amor de Deus. Não se sinta influenciável por mim. Vai pesquisar, vai estudar e faz a famosa balança, se vale a pena ou não. Tá? Vamos continuar aqui, vamos ver. Já tá acabando.
Could be there in 10 years. I hate to make time frame because, people ask me, how's it been going? Is it going faster than you thought or slower than you thought? And I swear, some days I feel like we spend years and we don't get anywhere. And other days I feel like the world is changing so fast. Like it's amazing how far we've come. And I think there's truth to both. I think some things are easier than we thought. Some things are a lot harder than we thought. So I hate to bound predictions with time, but I think that's the direction that we're all trying to go.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, so I share your thoughts on COIL and streaming payments. Be remiss in not mentioning that, we at Uphold support and work with COIL and streaming.
Ele tá encerrando a matéria. Cara, que aulão, hein? David Schartz te falou o que é a parada. Te explicou. Agora tu não pode dizer assim, não sei o que é. Alguma noção tu vai pegar aqui, impossível. O próprio criador do projeto veio falar. Isso o ano passado. Consegui achar. Então, cara, valeu pela tua companhia, por esse aulão, a gente ter estudado junto. Se inscreva, deixa aquele like, isso me ajuda muito. Até a próxima, pessoal. Se vir alguma notícia, eu apareço no Corujão. Valeu!